Greetings, everyone. My name is Christopher Mendez, and I'm here today to present an analysis of a battle engagement that took place in the Sibuyan Sea during the Second World War. And we will try to answer two questions that are the subjects of much debate in the past. These are questions which ponders upon its decisiveness and size. And perhaps there's even a third question that we would also try to probe, and this is concerning the battleship Musashi and the location of its sinking. Before we proceed, though, let me put up some disclaimer. I am not a historian. I am a professional engineer by training. I spent most of my professional life overseas, most notably in Japan, where I was in the automotive industry doing research and development, and in Singapore, I was in the aviation industry. I was the aircraft on ground manager when I left Boeing 6 months ago to hopefully enjoy a life in retirement. At the moment, I am reading public policy and program administration in the University of the Philippines for a master's degree in public management. So, having that out of the way, shall we begin then? The premise for the Battle of Sibuyan Sea was grounded on the return of General Douglas MacArthur for the liberation of the Philippines, and with the landing of the invasion forces in Leyte on the 20th of October, 1944. General MacArthur chose Leyte as its staging point for the invasion of the Philippines. The Pacific Seventh Fleet was tasked to transport war material plus the entire invasion army and to deliver them safely to the beaches of Leyte to commence the liberation of the Philippine Islands. Now, the main concern of the Americans was that when, if they were attacked during the landings, they would be at their most vulnerable. And if this happens, MacArthur's promise of returning to the Philippines, liberating it, would be exposed to an imminent danger and even a possibility of defeat and eventual failure. The obvious areas where an attack would come from would be from the north, possibly coming from Formosa or Taiwan, or even through the San Bernardino Strait. It could also come from the south uh, into the Surigao Strait, and even from the south of Mindanao, Celebes Sea. So, to help out, the Third Fleet were further called into action to provide additional defensive support. They were positioned to guard the northern flank, while the battle group of the Seventh Fleet will be deployed as the protection for the southern flank. Meanwhile, the Japanese were aware of the plans of an American counteroffensive. They have studied different scenarios, how to thwart any invasion that would be staged by the Americans, and this evolved into the Shogo, or the victory plans. There were four of such plans, and these are complex naval operations uh, designed to thwart every possible scenario of an invasion. And when it was apparent that the invasion must be in central Philippines, Shogo 1 was activated. This calls for a coordinated, three-pronged, all-out attack against the enemy, composed of a northern force, a central force, and a southern force. And we have to take note that the Japanese Navy were committing nearly all of their available resources, their available forces for this battle. So both sides actually had correctly anticipated each other's plan of action. And so the pieces for one of the greatest battles in human history were all set up. All of these are committed to a single objective, which is either to destroy or protect Leyte Gulf, and thus this whole operation will later be known as the Battle for Leyte Gulf. For strength comparison, um, these are the composition of each of the battle force. The North Force has 17 ships in total and a few hundred aircraft because they have one fleet carrier. The Center Force has a total of 32 ships. 15 of those are capital ships, meaning battleships and heavy cruisers. These two forces will be going against the Third Fleet, which has a total of 94 ships, including 9 fleet carriers and 9 capital ships, plus 1,000 aircraft. The South Force has 14 uh, ships going against 80 of the 7th Fleet battle group. But we have to take note that out of that 80, 68 are destroyers. The 7th Fleet Transport Group is also equipped with 60 fighter ships for its close protection. So, all in all, Japan has about 63 ships, 22 of which are capital ships, against the US 234 with 20 of those capital ships. So, I would say, in terms of battleships and heavy cruisers, they are fairly even. But when it comes to the aircraft carriers, the US has a clear advantage with 17 against Japan's 4. On the midnight of the 22nd of October, while the center force was streaming along Palawan Island, they were accidentally spotted by 2 US submarines and were attacked with torpedoes. In the process, 2 of their heavy cruisers sank and one more was badly damaged. The damaged cruiser was ordered to go back for repairs to Brunei, escorted by 2 more destroyers as its cover and protection. The Japanese presence and location of of the Center Force has been confirmed by this U.S. submarine attack. And another thing is that one important thing is that the the capital ships were reduced by 3. They were down by 3 heavy cruisers. So, as the Center Force entered Tabla Strait in the morning of October 24, the Americans were already preparing a welcome party, as this is where the Japanese came into the range of the bombers, and thus the Battle of Sibuyan Sea was about to begin. But first, let's get to know the players and actors. This is the formation of the center force as they sail northeast between Mindoro and Tablas with the aim of reaching San Bernardino Strait by early evening of the same day. These are the main battleships and the heavy cruisers and the light cruisers. Outside of this formation is a ring of destroyers protecting the big ships from further submarine attacks and even um, aircraft attacks. The succeeding slides are photographs of the ships involved in the battle. This is the flagship of the Japanese Imperial Navy, the battleship Yamato, and her sister ship, the Musashi. They have the same build and design. The Chokai is a heavy cruiser. Another Japanese heavy cruiser is the Myoko, and this is a Japanese light cruiser and a Japanese destroyer. The main weapon of the Americans are actually their aircraft carriers, and this is the famous USS Enterprise, the flagship of the fleet and the flagship of many of the battles in the Pacific Ocean. This is the USS Intrepid, another fleet carrier. And this is the battleship Iowa. Iowa is the main class of battleships of the United States Navy. But even though they are the main battleships, they were only half of the weight of the Yamato class battleships. And the advantage of the American during the war in the Battle of Sibuyan Sea is that they have these airplanes. This is a dive bomber and a torpedo bomber. Fleet Admiral William Halsey was the commander of the Third Fleet of the United States Navy. At that time, he was 62 years old, while Admiral Kurita Takeo was the commander of the Central Fleet. So we proceed to the Battle of Sibuyan Sea now. This occurred on the 24th of October, 1944. On the morning of the 24th, the Third Fleet was situated about 80 kilometers from San Bernardino Strait. The center force was cruising at Tabla Strait at about 18 knots. When the location of the center force was sighted by patrol planes just off northern Tablas and south of Sibale, the Americans launched the first wave of attacks at about 9 in the morning. They found the Japanese over an hour later and dropped their first bombs. This was the first salvo of the Battle of Sibuyancy. During this first engagement, this is nearest the towns of San Andres and Calatrava and Tablas and the island municipalities of Corcuera and Concepcion. The attack was composed of about 44 aircrafts. The second wave of aircraft reached the center force when it was turning east in between Banton and Marinduque Islands at about 45 minutes past noon. And we have to take note that at this point, the Third Fleet was also undergoing heavy attack from land-based Japanese aircraft bombers coming from Central Luzon. And this is a very significant attack because this is the first time that the kamikaze saw action. And these attacks on the Third Fleet, the Japanese attack was a hindrance to the Third Fleet's capability to launch a sustained attack on the Sibuyan Sea forces of Admiral Kurita. It was only in the afternoon when the Americans were able to send a considerable number of aircraft. The third wave of 68 aircraft attacked and found the Japanese uh, fleet north of Cobrador Island. And this would be a terrifying sight for the communities along the eastern coast of Tablas Island and western coast of Romblon because this total of 68 aircraft would be flying low. And this is 1944. Um, Huge metal objects flying around and screaming deafening noises is unheard of, and perhaps to many, this would be their first time to see an airplane. And this particular path of the bomber planes may have been uh, the basis of the marker at Barangay Sawang in Romblon, which is located in the western part of the island, maybe. And the reason why the attacks came from such directions, from the north during the first two waves, and this time coming from the south, was to confuse the Japanese of where these planes are being launched. The fourth attack found the Imperial fleet just north of Sibuyan Island and east of Romblon Island. This is directly in front of the municipality of Magdiwang, and planes would be whizzing low across the island, and would have been seen even from the municipality of San Fernando. And this was where most of the damages were done, and Kurita was forced to do a maneuver to avoid the bombs. Uh, the last of the attack happened at 3 in the afternoon, and this was an important tipping point of the battle because Admiral Kurita made a tactical decision to feign a retreat. He turned around and made it look that he was withdrawing from battle, but he did this for two reasons. Number one is that he was at that time, um, at that particular point in battle, he was already confident that the planes attacking him were from an aircraft carrier group in the eastern part of the Philippines. So he wanted to get out of the aircraft range by sailing west. And number two is that he knows that the Northern Fleet will soon engage the Third Fleet, so he was just buying time. And true enough, at 4:40 in the afternoon, the Northern Fleet appeared on the radars of the Americans. Admiral Halsey, receiving reports that the Japanese in the Sibuyan Sea had turned back, prepared to meet the imminent threat coming from the north. Meanwhile, Admiral Kurita, hoping for the cover of darkness, turned back once again to resume his original objective of reaching the San Bernardino Strait. But it was at this point at 7:35 in the evening of the 24th of October that Musashi sank. And if you take a look at the original formation, when the Japanese entered Sibuyan Sea early in the day, only the Musashi was wrecked. Another heavy cruiser, the Miyoko, was badly damaged that it had to be escorted back by two more destroyers to Brunei. And while the Third Fleet was streaming north at full speed, Admiral Kurita and the Center Force traversed San Bernardino Strait at past midnight. This is already the early hours of October 25, with its fleet fairly intact. And with this, the Battle of Sibuyan Sea came to a close. So, before daybreak of October 25, the Battle of Sibuyan Sea was over. The Battle of Surigao Strait was still raging at that time, and so was the Battle of Cape Engaño, which was between the same Third Fleet that fought in the Sibuyan Sea, going against the newly arrived North Force of the Japanese. The Center Force emerged out of San Bernardino Strait unhindered, and they met the Seventh Fleet Task Force in a Battle of Samar. With the Center Force deploying 10 capital ships against the lightly equipped Seventh Fleet, made up of mostly destroyers, it was a fight between tricycles and dump trucks. But in a strange twist of fate, Kurita blundered. He miscalculated the enemy, and frightened by his own shadow, he ordered the withdrawal from battle and retreated completely. This actually surprised the Americans. And thus the Japanese just throwed out their only chance to destroy the invasion forces being unloaded in Leyte. But it was very, very close indeed. Oh, this is the original map of the Battle of Sibuyan Sea, taken from the naval archives from the US Naval Academy. And as we go back to the map of central Philippines, here's that uh, battle map superimposed. I wanted to share this with you to show that when Musashi sank, the fleet was at the northern area of the Sibuyan Sea, and that the wreck of Musashi is closer to Quezon Province, Bontoc Peninsula, than it is from any in Romblon. The closest part of Romblon, in fact, to that area is the island of Banton, which by estimate is about 40 to 50 kilometers away from the wreckage. Finally, let us look at the significance of uh, Musashi in the Battle of Sibuyan Sea. Firstly was that it was she was hit by 19 bombs and 17 torpedoes. That's a total of 36 hits. But yet it took 3 more hours after the last engagement before it sank. The second is that Musashi became a magnet for the 300 aircrafts that attacked the central force because of its size and slow speed due to hits sustained early on in the battle. So Musashi almost single-handedly took the brunt of the American attack, and in the process, she spared many ships from her battle group. This brings us to our final thoughts on the Battle of Sibuyan Sea. It it was a major engagement between airplanes and battleships, and this is a stark contrast to what happened in Surigao Strait, where it was a surface battle between two battleships groups, and in fact, it was the last instance where two battleships met face to face. The Battle of Sibuyancy was participated by about 300 aircraft and 27 ships. But at the end of the battle, the 27 ships was only reduced to 23. 23 of the Japanese Imperial Navy's assets remained in operation and in full combat readiness. So only 4 was removed from the scene of the battle. So Sibuyan Sea, the battle there, was an integral part of a massive multifaceted operation that is collectively known as the Battle for Leyte Gulf, which in its totality and in terms of firepower and geographical extent can be considered as the greatest naval battle in history. But on its own, the Battle of Sibuyancy was neither decisive nor largest. With that, I leave you with the image of Musashi to end this presentation. And if you have further interest in the subject, these are the references where much of the information in this presentation was derived from. Um, 2 books. The first is The Battle of Leyte Gulf by H.P. Wilmot, and another good one is The Battle for Leyte Gulf by Van Woodward. So thank you very much.